Hey guys, tonight we begin with something a little darker, a time of plagues, punishments, and pottage. We're diving into what life was really like during the Middle Ages. Forget the castles and chivalry Hollywood soldier. The truth is, you probably wouldn't last a single day. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Life in medieval times. Congratulations, you've just woken up in the year 1325. Good news, you are alive. The bad news, so are the fleas. Your bed is a half-rotted straw mattress stuffed with bugs and hay that smells like a barn floor, because it was a barn floor 3 months ago. There's no memory foam, no pillows, and definitely no Egyptian cotton sheets. Just a wool blanket that hasn't been washed since last winter and now weighs roughly as much as a small cow from the accumulated grime. You blink awake as the church bell clangs in the distance. It's the medieval version of an alarm clock, only louder and somehow even less merciful. Your home is a wooden hut with one room, no windows, and a charming open concept floor plan where your family livestock and domestic insects all share the same space. The smell, it's a fragrant symphony, a subtle blend of stale beer, human sweat goat, and something you pray isn't mold, but know in your soul probably is. Scented candles haven't been invented, and even if they were, they would just melt on your dirt floor. You try to stretch, but immediately regret it because the air is freezing and your joints ache. You're 22, which in medieval terms is roughly middle-aged. Your spine cracks like an old wooden door, and your knees sound like a bag of rocks being shaken by a confused peasant. Getting out of bed is a gamble. The floor is either wet from last night's rain, which leaks through the thatched roof, or crusty from something your neighbor's chicken did. Either way, your bare feet are now part of the ecosystem. Oh, and privacy. What's that? Your entire family and maybe a random cousin who just never left are waking up beside you. There's no bedroom, no curtains, no me time, just communal everything. Welcome to morning in medieval Europe, where you're never truly alone because parasites, rodents, and 8 other people are always with you. And this is how your day begins. It only gets worse from here. So you've managed to crawl out of your medieval haystack of horrors? Congrats. Now nature calls, and it's not calling politely, it's screaming. Here's the part where you start missing the modern bathroom. There's no toilet, no seat, no toilet paper, no flush, not even a mildly resentful plunger in the corner. In the 14th century, relieving yourself was an adventure, a social experiment, and often a small public event. If you're a peasant, your bathroom is likely a wooden bucket behind the house, which is already full because Uncle Wolfstan had a rough night after eating bad turnips. The smell is biblical. You hold your breath, do your business, and then here's the kicker. Toss it into the street. Yes, the street. You're supposed to shout something like, "Garde l'eau," before dumping it out the window. That's Old French for watch out for the water. Although, frankly, no one ever moves fast enough. Streets in medieval towns are open sewers, a charming river of human waste, animal droppings, and mystery liquids you'd rather not examine. If you're lucky enough to live in a town with public latrines, congratulations. You get to sit shoulder to shoulder with strangers in an outhouse where privacy is a myth and ventilation is a cruel joke. You might make small talk, but try not to breathe too deeply. Toilet paper. Never heard of it. Most people wipe with straw leaves, rags, moss, or if they're feeling especially indulgent, a scrap of wool. Sometimes nothing at all, which might explain why handshakes weren't popular yet. And if you're in a castle, surely it's better, right? Well, sort of. You might have a garderobe, a hole in the wall that drops your waste directly into the moat. Great idea, except your enemies know this. And yes, attackers sometimes climbed in through waste chutes. Talk about entering through the back door. So whether you're a farmer or a baron, medieval toileting is a humiliation ritual. It's cold, it's public, it's dangerous, and it's never not disgusting. One slip on a wet stone path, and you're face first in humanity's leftovers. You survived the toilet. You deserve a reward, right? Maybe a nice breakfast? Something warm, delicious, comforting. Sorry, this is medieval Europe. Nothing is comforting here. Breakfast, if you can call it that, is a grim affair. There are no eggs Benedict, no coffee machines sputtering awake, and certainly no avocado toast. You sit down or squat near the fire to a wooden bowl of something that looks like it was scraped off a muddy boot. Welcome to your daily pottage diet. Pottage is a thick, gloopy stew made of whatever you can find grains, root vegetables, maybe a few beans if you're lucky. It's been simmering in the same pot for days, sometimes weeks, and new ingredients are just dumped on top of the old ones. It's less a recipe and more of an ongoing edible experiment. On the side, a hunk of bread so hard it could deflect arrows. It's made from coarse rye or barley flour, often bulked up with sawdust or ground up acorns because wheat is a rich man's fantasy. What about drinks? You're not sipping orange juice or an oat milk latte. You're drinking beer. Yes, beer. At 6:00 a.m. Why? Because the water is teeming with parasites and filth. So you start your day with small ale, low in alcohol, high in survivability. Kids drink it too. No one's happy about it, but at least it won't kill you immediately. Want some meat or cheese? Dream on. That's for Sundays and saints' feast days, and only if your Lord is feeling generous. As for fresh fruit, that's only when it's in season and not already fermented into wine. And don't even think about spices unless you're royalty. A pinch of pepper costs more than your monthly wages. Salt is valuable enough to be locked away. So you chew your gritty bread gulp, your medieval beer, and try not to think about the rat that may have nibbled your pottage in the night. Breakfast doesn't energize you, it just happens to you. So you've eaten your sad medieval breakfast, and now it's time to get dressed. Your wardrobe consists of exactly one outfit. One. It's a rough wool tunic or linen shift that you've worn every day for months, possibly years. There's no such thing as seasonal fashion. Just wear this until it disintegrates or gives you a fungal infection. Underwear is optional. If you're lucky, maybe a linen undertunic. If you're not well, you're going commando under layers of scratchy, sweaty wool. There's also no washing machine, no soap, and absolutely no dry cleaner in sight. So your clothes are stained stiff and scented like a compost pile that's been left to marinate in a pigsty. Even if you wanted to wash them, it's not easy. You'd have to haul water from a river or well heat it over a fire scrub, your tunic on a board with ashes or lye, and hang it in the sun, which is out approximately 3 days a year. And don't get me started on shoes. If you own any, they're made of untreated leather, barely stitched together, and offer as much arch support as a banana peel. Most peasants just go barefoot through mud, through dung, through medieval landmines, aka sharp rocks and disease puddles. All this means one thing: your skin hates you. You itch constantly. Fleas, lice, and bed bugs live rent-free on your body. Everyone has them. Nobles, lousy monks, itchy children, walking insect farms. No one escapes. You'll be scratching your armpit with a wooden spoon while chatting with the local priest, and no one will even bat an eye. Your skin is raw from rubbing. Your scalp is a battlefield of bites. And if you develop a rash, well, too bad. There's no dermatologist, no hydrocortisone, no one to tell you it's probably scabies. You just keep on suffering. Now that you're dressed in misery and wrapped in discomfort, it's time to head outside and start working yourself to death. But first, it's time to flash that morning smile. Except you don't. Because in the Middle Ages, smiling was a dangerous game. Not emotionally dentally. There's no toothbrush, no toothpaste, no mouthwash, no floss. The concept of oral hygiene is about as popular as bathing, which is to say, not very. Some people might chew on a twig or rinse with wine or vinegar, but for the most part your teeth are on their own and they're not doing well. By the time you hit your mid-20s, your smile looks like something pulled from a haunted crypt. Cavities are rampant, gums are swollen, and those aren't just food stains on your teeth, that's decay. You have more rot in your mouth than a medieval root cellar. Toothaches. Get used to them. They're like medieval weather, always there in the background, the kind of pain that makes you consider praying, drinking, or pulling the tooth out yourself with a pair of pliers. And that's not a joke. That was the actual treatment. Dentists didn't really exist, but barber surgeons did. Yes, the same guy who cuts your hair is also pulling your molars out by candlelight, with an iron hook and zero anesthesia. Infected tooth. Hope you like fevers, because without antibiotics it can easily turn into sepsis and kill you. From a toothache. That's right. The same thing that sends us to a pharmacy today could be your funeral in the 1300s. Time to head to work. Except there's no office, no desk, no coffee break, and no chance of promotion. Your job, if you're like 90% of the population, is simple. Don't die working for someone else's comfort. You're a peasant. Congratulations. That means you work the land that belongs to a lord who probably doesn't remember your name. You rise with the sun and stop only when it disappears behind the trees. Your tools, a wooden hoe, a rusty sickle, and whatever bones are still intact in your body. There's no weekend. There's no clocking out. There's only sunrise to sunset 6 days a week. Sunday is off, but only if you're not harvesting, fighting off raiders, or praying feverishly for your infected toe to stop turning black. The work is brutal. Fields are plowed by hand or with oxen if you're rich enough to afford one. You dig ditches, sow seeds, pull weeds, and carry water until your spine begins to resemble the letter S. No one cares if you're tired. No one's asking how your mental health is doing if you're a woman. Surprise, you don't just do field work. You also care for children, Clean cook, spin wool, feed animals, and pretend your husband's lice infestation isn't slowly migrating to your side of the bed. Children start helping out around age 5. No school, no toys, just a tiny wooden rake and a dream of one day not dying of the flu. And if you're one of the few who isn't a farmer, maybe you're a blacksmith, a tanner, or a cooper, great, you still work with fire chemicals or animal guts all day in poorly ventilated sheds. The pay? Basically survival. Break a bone. Too bad. Get a fever. Drink some warm beer and keep going. You can't afford to stop even for a day because if you don't work, you don't eat. And if you don't eat, well, medieval Europe has a solution for that. It's called being replaced. So you grip your shovel, ignore the blisters, and keep digging because in the Middle Ages, your job wasn't a career. It was a slow-motion endurance test. Now that your back is on fire from laboring in the fields, let's talk about the weather. Because in the Middle Ages, temperature is less about seasons and more about ongoing punishment from the sky. Let's start with winter. There's no insulation, no central heating, and no weather stripping. Just wooden walls with gaps you could throw a chicken through. The fire in the hearth is nice in theory, but you don't have enough firewood to keep it going because wood is expensive and gathering it from the forest is sometimes illegal. Yes, you can be executed for picking up the wrong stick from the wrong forest. You bundle up in your one damp wool tunic huddle near the dying embers and still wake up with your nose frozen. Frostbite isn't diagnosed, it's just called bad luck. Now fast forward to summer. Sounds better, right, wrong? In summer, your home turns into a clay oven. There's no fan, no cross breeze, and absolutely no deodorant. You sweat through your layers, but you can't remove them because showing too much skin is scandalous. And also invites sunburn, insect bites, and social judgment. The flies are out in full force attracted to your unwashed body and the smell of last week's goat stew that's still fermenting in the corner. In the fields, the sun bakes you. No sunblock, no hat, unless you've fashioned one out of straw like a desperate scarecrow. Heat stroke is just called taking a bad turn. So you're either shivering in your own home, wondering if your toes will make it to spring, or you're sweating through your clothes while your thighs chafe into oblivion. And the one thing that never changes, no matter the season, your clothes still itch, your food is still terrible, and your next job is still waiting. Feeling thirsty? Need to freshen up? Want to splash a little water on your face to wake up from this damp fever dream of a life? Too bad. In medieval times, water wasn't your friend. It was trying to murder you quietly. Let's start with drinking. The nearby stream looks fresh, bubbling, and clear like something out of a fantasy movie. But spoiler alert, it's not. Upstream, someone just dumped a chamber pot into it. And if not a dead pig, is probably decomposing in it. Parasites, bacteria, and the entire microbial army of medieval Europe are awaiting in every sip. That's why people drank beer. Yes, beer, even children. But before you imagine medieval kids doing keg stands, understand that it was small beer, weak in alcohol, but strong in survival. Brewing boiled the water so it was safer than whatever flowed through the town ditch. What about bathing? Surely water was used for cleaning. In theory, yes. In practice, absolutely not. See, back then people believed bathing actually opened your pores and let disease in. That's right. Washing yourself was considered medically risky. You were cleaner, apparently, if you never removed the protective layer of filth caked onto your skin. Communal bathhouses did exist, but they quickly gained reputations as places for gossip, scandal, and sometimes full-on medieval extracurriculars. So naturally, the church got involved and shut many of them down. So you drank the water. Or maybe you didn't. Maybe you just stubbed your toe on a rock shaped like disappointment. Either way, you're sick. You need help. You need a doctor. Too bad you live in the Middle Ages where medicine is really just polite torture with a theology degree. Let's start with the diagnosis. Everything wrong with you, whether it's a cough, rash, broken bone, or the creeping plague, is caused by your humors being out of balance. The 4 humors were blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. According to medieval science, your health depended on keeping them balanced like some sort of internal soup. Got a fever? Too much blood? The answer: bloodletting. That's right. Let's drain your life force into a bowl using a dull blade or a hungry leech. And yes, barbers were often the ones doing it. Now, if you break a bone or get a nasty wound, you're in real trouble. There's no anesthesia unless you count passing out from pain. Surgery is done with knives that haven't been cleaned since the Crusades. Tools are heated over a fire not for sterilization, but because they just look scarier that way. Antibiotics, centuries away. Germ theory has not been invented yet. They think disease comes from bad air, or God being annoyed with your moral failings. Got a stomachache? Must have been your sinful thoughts. Hope you like confessing while vomiting. If your condition gets worse, you'll be treated with more leeches, possibly some crushed beetles, and a priest at your bedside giving last rites just in case. At this point, they're preparing for the cure known as death. And if by some miracle you recover, everyone just assumes God took pity on you. The doctor takes full credit, and the leech gets promoted. In the Middle Ages, medicine is less about healing and more about surviving the cure. After a long day of labor lice and leeches, it's finally time to eat. You shuffle back to your home stomach growling, ready for the one joy left in life, a warm meal. Bad news. Your food is probably trying to kill you. Let's begin with the basics. Food preservation doesn't really exist. There's no fridge, no freezer, just salt smoke, or the hope that winter air keeps things fresh. Your meat, if you're lucky enough to have any, has been hanging for days, covered in flies, marinated in questionable brine, and possibly shared with a rat or two. Bread is the cornerstone of the medieval diet, but even that isn't safe. In bad harvest years, desperate peasants bulk it up with bark sawdust or even clay to make it stretch. And if it's rye season, there's a bonus ergot, a fungus that causes convulsions, hallucinations, and sometimes death. It's like eating bread laced with LSD and tetanus. Vegetables, only if they're in season. And you know what's always in season? Turnips. So many turnips. Boiled, mashed, or floating in pottage, which, if you remember, is basically a hot swamp of mystery ingredients that's been simmering since your great-grandfather's funeral. Dairy is another gamble. Fresh milk spoils in hours. Butter and cheese fare better, but they're loaded with bacteria. People eat them anyway because, frankly, it's either that or chew your boot leather. And let's talk about seasoning. Spices like pepper, cinnamon, or nutmeg are worth more than gold. For the average peasant, flavor comes from onion salt, if you're lucky, and pain. Most meals taste like wet burlap sprinkled with sadness. But food isn't just a health hazard, it's a political one. Game animals belong to the Lord, not you. Caught poaching a rabbit, you could be fined, imprisoned, or even executed. That's right, your dinner could get you hanged. So as you sit down to eat your gray stew by flickering firelight, remember every bite is a risk. But you eat anyway because in the Middle Ages, food didn't nourish. It tested you. It's evening now. You've worked, suffered, and barely digested your suspicious stew. You might think the day is winding down, but don't get too relaxed because God is watching. So is the priest, and so is your neighbor Agnes, who will absolutely rat you out if you miss Mass. In medieval Europe, religion isn't just part of life. It is life. The church controls your calendar, your laws, your education, if you can read your birth, marriage, death, and everything in between. Think of it as your spiritual landlord, and you're always behind on rent. Every day is structured around prayer bells, eat meat on a Friday sin. Think about your neighbor's wife in that one dream double sin. And yes, hell is very real, vividly real. Priests describe it in glorious detail, rivers of fire lakes of boiling blood, demons with pitchforks, and eternal wailing. If the plague doesn't scare you, eternal damnation definitely will. You can't read the Bible yourself because it's written in Latin, a language reserved for monks, clergy, and that one noble kid who's too good for dirt. You rely on the church to interpret everything for you. Tithes, a tenth of everything you own, are mandatory. Questioning the church is dangerous. Heretics are burned, witches are drowned, blasphemers are flogged, and skeptics are quickly reformed. So you go through the motions. You chant, you bow, you pray that your soul, after enduring this dirt-covered life, might finally land in paradise, assuming the priest likes you. Because in the Middle Ages, God may be merciful, but the church not so much. If you thought being a medieval peasant was rough, try doing it as a woman. It's all the filth, famine, and fear, plus childbirth subservience and social invisibility. In the Middle Ages, being a woman is like playing on hard mode with no health potions and no restart button. From birth, a girl's life path is pretty much locked in. Marry young, bear children, serve your husband, die tired. Education, not likely. Unless you're from a noble family and sent to a convent, your intellectual development stops around the time you learn how to churn butter and patch a tunic. Marriage happens early, really early. It's not weird to be betrothed at 12 and pregnant by 14. It's not about love. It's about land, livestock, and alliances. Your opinion is not required. Once married, you're basically your husband's property. Your job is to produce heirs, feed everyone, keep the house running, and not complain. Because complaining might get you branded a nag, or worse, a witch. That label comes with a complimentary drowning or burning depending on local fashion. Childbirth is a death lottery. There's no prenatal care, no sterile tools, no anesthesia. Midwives do their best, but even minor complications can mean death for the mother, the child, or both. Some women survive 10 pregnancies. Many don't survive 2. If you're unmarried, you're suspicious. If you're widowed, vulnerable. If you're outspoken, dangerous. Women who didn't conform were often accused of witchcraft, especially if they had herbal knowledge, a strong personality, or just looked at someone funny on a rainy Tuesday. So far, you've battled filth, starvation, and social injustice. But just when you think your day can't get any worse, here comes violence, loud, bloody, and often completely acceptable by medieval standards. Let's be clear, the Middle Ages were not peaceful. The idea of law and order mostly meant hope the local lord isn't in a bad mood. Crime is common, punishment is brutal, and justice is more performance art than protection. Steal a loaf of bread. You could lose a hand. Accused of lying, your tongue might get pierced. Gossip too much. Meet the scold's bridle, a metal mask strapped to your head with a bar in your mouth. Let's say you're accused of something serious, heresy, theft, witchcraft. How do you prove your innocence? By being tortured, obviously. Welcome to trial by ordeal. One version, you stick your hand in boiling water to retrieve a stone. If it heals without infection in 3 days, you're innocent. If not, you're guilty. Another option, you're tossed into a river. If you sink, you're innocent and probably dead. If you float, you're guilty and will be punished anyway. And if you're sentenced to death, that's a public event. Executions are performed in front of cheering crowds, hangings, beheadings, burnings. Sometimes people bring snacks. It's the medieval equivalent of cable TV. Violence isn't a breakdown of society in the Middle Ages. It is society. At this point, you've made it through the lice, the leeches, the laundryless misery, and the looming threat of public disembowelment. But now comes the final chapter of most medieval lives, an early and unglamorous death. If you're alive and still breathing past the age of 40, you're practically a celebrity. You might even be called the Old One, which is less a nickname and more a statistical miracle. Let's break it down. The average life expectancy hovered around 30 to 40 years, but that number is dragged down heavily by infant mortality. Nearly half of all children died before reaching age 5. Disease, malnutrition, or one bad winter was all it took. No vaccines, no antibiotics, no hope. If you survived childhood, you entered adulthood already exhausted. Work began as soon as you could walk upright. By 25, your joints creaked like a monastery door. You might be missing several teeth, a finger, and most of your original optimism. Women faced a particularly deadly gauntlet: childbirth. It was one of the leading causes of death for medieval women. For men, the dangers were different but equally relentless: farming accidents, infections from minor wounds, a neighbor's drunken rage, a crusade gone sideways. Death could also come quietly from the plague, which turned cities into cemeteries overnight, or from famine, which could thin out entire villages. So, how's your day been? You've woken up in filth, relieved yourself into a bucket, brushed your teeth with wishful thinking, nearly passed out from hunger, worked until your spine cried for mercy, scratched your way through itchy wool, prayed to not get the plague, and barely dodged a public execution. Welcome to a day in medieval Europe. Still dreaming of becoming a knight? Think again. That romanticized version of the Middle Ages: gallant swordsmen, noble ladies in towers, heroic battles, and feasts in candlelit great halls, is a myth polished by fairy tales and fantasy books. In truth, the medieval world was gritty, cruel, and deeply unfair. Hierarchy was everything. If you were born poor, you stayed poor. If you were born rich, congratulations, you had a better chance of surviving, but you were still one bad soup away from dysentery and a hasty burial. The simpler times weren't simple. They were relentless. Life was survival, not leisure. You lived, suffered, worked, and died within a 10-mile radius of where you were born. But here's the wildest part. Through all of this, people still laughed, sang songs, told stories, fell in love, and found meaning. Not because life was easy, but because humans are stubborn like that. Even in the darkest chapters, they made space for light. So tonight, when you slip into your clean bed with indoor plumbing, antibiotics, and central heating, maybe say a quiet thank you to the modern world and to your ancestors who fought rats, famine, and feudalism so you wouldn't have to. Frida Kahlo's Life and Art. Frida Kahlo was born on July 6, 1907, in the vibrant district of Coyoacán, then a village on the outskirts of Mexico City. Her childhood home, the Casa Azul, the Blue House, was filled with color contradiction and quiet strength. It would later become a sanctuary, a battleground, and a museum dedicated to one of the most iconic artists of the 20th century. Frida was the third of four daughters born to Guillermo Kahlo, a German-Hungarian photographer, and Matilde Calderon, a devout Catholic of indigenous and Spanish descent. Her parents were opposites, Guillermo reserved and intellectual, Matilde religious and emotionally distant. Frida would inherit her father's introspection and artistic eye, but also her mother's fierce resilience. As a child, Frida was imaginative, outspoken, and bold. But at the age of 6, she contracted polio, which left her right leg thinner and weaker than the other. A physical difference she tried to mask with long skirts, but never allowed to limit her spirit. With the goal of becoming a doctor, she enrolled in the prestigious National Preparatory School in Mexico City. At age 15, one of only a handful of girls accepted. There she stood out, not just for her intelligence, but for her rebellious wit and unique sense of style. She joined a group of young intellectuals known as the Cachuchas, who debated philosophy, literature, and politics. Even in those early years before the bus crash that would define her body and the fame that would define her legacy, Frida Kahlo was already painting herself into the world with sharp edges and unapologetic ideas. On September 17, 1925, Frida Kahlo's life was split in two. That afternoon, the wooden bus she was riding with her boyfriend, Alejandro Gomez Arias, collided with a streetcar. The crash was horrific. Frida, just 18 years old, was impaled by an iron handrail that entered her left hip and exited through her pelvis. Her spinal column fractured in 3 places, her right leg shattered, and her collarbone, ribs, and foot were broken. As she lay broken, a pouch of gold powder she had been carrying exploded on impact, dusting her form in what looked like glittering ash. Frida spent weeks in a body cast at the Red Cross hospital flat on her back, writhing with infection and uncertainty. The future she had imagined as a doctor slipped further away. But in that stillness, something began to stir. Her father gave her brushes, her mother rigged a special easel to hang above her bed, and a mirror was placed on the canopy so she could see herself. There, lying in plaster and agony, Frida began to paint. Her first subjects were her own reflection because, as she famously said, "I paint myself because I am so often alone and because I am the subject I know best." The crash had broken her physically, but it had also opened a door into her own mind, her own body. and eventually into the surreal language of pain and identity that would define her art. Frida didn't paint pretty flowers or polite landscapes. She painted her pain physical, emotional, and existential. Her early works were small in scale, painted on tin or wood panels inspired by Mexican retablos, devotional paintings that tell stories of suffering and miracles. Her body became the canvas. In one painting, she is impaled by nails like a modern-day martyr. In another, she floats in a barren landscape tethered to a broken column, a metaphor for her shattered spine. Her pain was not sanitized. She painted the ugliness of trauma with beauty, defiance, and even humor. In 1928, still recovering 21-year-old Frida met the man who would become the most profound and turbulent relationship of her life, Diego Rivera. 20 years her senior, he was already Mexico's most famous painter, a giant of Mexican muralism. She brought her paintings to him and asked bluntly, "Do I have talent?" Diego recognized in her something rare, an unfiltered voice, raw and unpretentious. They began a consuming creative relationship and married in 1929. Her parents called it a marriage between an elephant and a dove. Their bond was passionate but chaotic. Diego supported her art but was endlessly unfaithful, even with Frida's own sister, Christina. In return, Frida took lovers of her own, both men and women, including rumored affairs with Leon Trotsky and the painter Georgia O'Keeffe. They divorced in 1939, only to remarry a year later on different terms, with Frida keeping her own home money and autonomy. Frida once said, "There have been two great accidents in my life. One was the trolley, and the other was Diego." Diego was by far the worst. Despite the betrayals, he remained a constant force in her life. He wounded her, but he also believed in her as a revolutionary artist. In the 1930s, Frida followed Diego to San Francisco, Detroit, and New York. The opulence she witnessed in the United States, especially during the Great Depression, deepened her disillusionment. A proud Mexican nationalist and committed communist, she mocked American materialism and missed the grit and color of Mexico. It was during this time that her artistic style solidified. One of her most powerful works, Henry Ford Hospital, 1932, shows her lying on a hospital bed after a miscarriage, surrounded by floating symbols of loss, a fetus, a snail, a cracked pelvis. It was a canvas that bled with truth. When Frida returned to Mexico, she stepped fully into herself. Her Casa Azul became a sanctuary of color and contradiction, cobalt walls, Aztec statues, and monkeys wandering freely. She wore bold Tijuana dresses, wove flowers into her hair, and painted amid the scent of copal incense. This period marked an explosion of creativity. Works like The Two Fridas, 1939, revealed a divided self, one in European dress with a bleeding heart, the other in indigenous clothing, strong and composed. She exhibited in Paris, where artists like Picasso and Kandinsky praised her style. But when André Breton tried to label her a surrealist, she pushed back. "They thought I was a surrealist," she said, "but I wasn't. I never painted dreams. I painted my own reality." As the 1940s wore on, Frida's health continued to decline. She underwent more than 30 surgeries in her lifetime, often encased in steel corsets or immobilized by traction devices. But still, she painted. In The Broken Column, 1944, she presents herself split down the middle, her body pierced with nails, a cracked ionic column replacing her spine. Yet her gaze is unflinching. In 1953, Frida was given her first solo exhibition in Mexico. Doctors told her she was too ill to attend. So she arrived by ambulance, was carried in on a stretcher, and placed in the center of the gallery on her hospital bed. Dressed in traditional finery, she greeted guests with tequila laughter and a fire still burning in her eyes. Her last known work was a still life of sliced watermelons, one piece, bearing the words, "Viva la vida," long live life. On July 13, 1954, at the age of 47, Frida Kahlo died in the Casa Azul. The official cause was a pulmonary embolism, but those closest to her whispered of exhaustion from the long war with her body. Her last diary entry was brief, but piercing. "I hope the exit is joyful, and I hope never to return." In the years after her death, Frida Kahlo refused to disappear. As feminist scholars and activists reclaimed forgotten voices in the 1970s and 80s, hers became louder. She became a symbol of pain turned into beauty, of resistance, of Mexican identity, of queerness, disability, and authenticity. Her face, the unibrow, the direct gaze, the flowers in her hair became iconic. Her home became a museum, and her paintings now hang in the world's greatest galleries. Today, Frida Kahlo is a global symbol of defiance. In a world that demands perfection, she gave us realness, raw, messy, and vibrant. She celebrated what made her different and turned it into art that transcended borders. For queer communities, she is a fearless bisexual icon. For women, she is a reminder that power doesn't require permission. For disabled artists, she is proof that pain can fuel the brush, not stop it. And for Mexico, she is a daughter reclaimed fierce folkloric and forever part of the national soul. She never asked to be a symbol. She simply told the truth about herself. And in doing so, she told the truth for millions who had never seen themselves reflected in art before. The Red Queen of Palenque. In the humid depths of the Chiapas jungle in southern Mexico, the ruins of Palenque whisper stories from the ancient Maya world. Towering temples rise above the canopy, their limestone faces eroded by time, but still brimming with secrets. In 1994, one of those secrets revealed itself. A team of Mexican archaeologists, led by Fanny Lopez Jimenez, was surveying Temple the Three, a relatively modest pyramid next to the more famous Temple of the Inscriptions, the burial site of the mighty King Kiinich Jenab Pakal. The temple wasn't expected to hold much until they noticed something odd, a sealed hidden chamber beneath the structure. No looters had touched it. It was pristine. When the archaeologists broke through and lowered themselves inside, they found a stone sarcophagus resting in silence. The air was heavy with the weight of centuries. As they opened the lid, red dust rose like smoke, brilliant, shocking red. The interior was covered in powdered cinnabar, a toxic mercury sulfide used ceremonially by the Maya. And lying within that crimson cloud was the skeleton of a woman. She had been buried with care and reverence. Her bones were fragile but intact, her skull still wearing a jade mask, and her body was surrounded by funerary offerings, necklaces, diadems, and ear spools, all crafted from jade and shell. Everything about the burial screamed royalty, yet no name was inscribed, no glyphs identified her. It was one of the richest female burials ever found in Mesoamerica, and yet it was a total enigma. The researchers called her the Red Queen, and the name stuck. Even with modern forensics, they couldn't say for sure who she was, only that she had lived around the 7th century during the golden age of Palenque. The most haunting feature of the Red Queen's tomb wasn't her jade jewelry or the silence of the sealed chamber. It was the red dust. A thick layer of powdered cinnabar covered everything: the sarcophagus, the walls, her bones, and the offering around her. To the Maya, this was no accident. Cinnabar made from crushed mercury sulfide was one of the most sacred and dangerous substances in the ancient world. Its vibrant red color symbolized blood rebirth and the life force that connected the human and divine realms. Covering the dead in cinnabar was a ritual meant to transform the body, preserving it not for eternity, but for transition. In Maya belief, death wasn't the end, it was a passage into another cosmic layer. But cinnabar is also toxic. In Palenque, very few were buried with it. Pakal the Great, the mighty king whose pyramid dominates the site, was one. His body, like hers, was also saturated in the red powder. That detail alone drew speculation. Was the Red Queen his wife, his mother, or someone of equal divine status? Surrounding the Red Queen's crimson-drenched remains was a world of offerings, each one carefully chosen to accompany her on the journey to the Maya afterlife, Xibalba. At her sides were heavy jade necklaces, their polished surfaces still radiant after 300 years underground. The Maya considered jade a symbol of eternal life, representing the green of maize and the breath of the gods. One of the most haunting objects was the jade funerary mask, placed delicately over her face, constructed from dozens of tiny mosaic tiles arranged to mimic the contours of her skull. The mask served a ritual function to protect the soul, preserve identity, and present her as divine in the eyes of the gods. For all the grandeur of her tomb, the Red Queen left behind one haunting void. No name, no inscriptions adorned her sarcophagus. The most compelling theory is that the Red Queen was Zakbu Ajau, the wife of Kinich Janab Pakal. Zakbu Ajau was more than just Pakal's consort. Born into nobility, she bore at least 3 sons and played a key ceremonial role during her husband's reign. The tomb's location, just a few feet away from Pakal's own grand burial, suggests a deliberate pairing, husband and wife rulers, even in death. The intense cinnabar coverage in both burials further supports this connection. However, the mystery deepens. DNA tests conducted on both sets of remains were inconclusive. The woman's bones showed no direct maternal link to Pakal's sons, though this doesn't rule out a spousal relationship. Some have argued she could have been Sakkuk Pakal's powerful mother, who ruled Palenque as queen regent before he came of age. Still, the evidence points most strongly to Zakbu Ajau. To understand the Red Queen, we must understand the world she came from, a world where royal Maya women held more influence than many realize. They were diplomats, priestesses, and power brokers who conducted rituals and played crucial roles in maintaining dynastic legitimacy. Their bloodlines were political capital. Across the Maya world, in places like Yaxchilan Naranjo and Calakmul, inscriptions show women performing major ceremonies and sometimes ruling outright. This context casts the Red Queen in a new light. Her burial rich, sacred, and positioned beside Pakal's suggests she was a central pillar in the royal order. The Red Queen's tomb wasn't merely a grave, it was a gateway to eternity. Constructed deep within the core of Temple the Firdaw and accessible only by a steep, narrow staircase, the chamber itself is stark made of cut stone and sealed tightly for over 300 years. No glyphs or murals cover the walls, but perhaps that silence is intentional, a space not for the living to interpret, but for the dead to transform. The tomb is aligned east to west, a symbolic path mirroring the sun's journey from life to death. Just a few steps away from her final resting place lies the iconic tomb of Pakal the Great. While Pakal's sarcophagus lid is famously engraved with scenes of cosmic rebirth, the Red Queen's simpler tomb contains no such iconography. The symbolism lies in the pairing itself. If Pakal represented the sun journeying through the underworld at night to rise again, then the Red Queen may have represented the moon, a feminine force following its own mysterious path. Together, they embodied a cosmic duality. By placing her beside Pakal, the Maya were preserving not just a marriage, but a cosmic partnership. Though her name was lost to time, the Red Queen of Palenque endures as one of the most enigmatic and powerful women of the ancient world. Her tomb, sealed for over 300 years now, whispers across centuries. She forces us to reevaluate assumptions, reminding us that in the ancient Maya world, women were not silent. They led rituals, governed cities, and shaped dynasties. While kings like Pakal have long taken the spotlight, the Red Queen's reemergence shows that power did not belong to men alone. It flowed through mothers, queens, priestesses, and visionaries. Her legacy is more than the treasure she left behind. It's the conversation she started. She remains wrapped in red, the color of life and sacrifice, of blood and rebirth. Her face, once hidden behind a jade mask, now stares back at us through science art and wonder. She remains nameless, but not voiceless, mysterious, but not forgotten. The Red Queen may have ruled a kingdom in life, but in death she rules something greater, our imagination. The rise of Catherine the Great. Long before she was Catherine the Great Empress of all Russia, mistress of reform and icon of ambition, she was simply Sophie, born Sophie Friederike August von Anhalt-Zerbst in 1729. She was the daughter of a relatively obscure German princely family. Her tiny duchy in Pomerania offered little in terms of power, but Sophie herself possessed something no title could provide: razor-sharp intelligence, relentless charm, and a quiet, burning hunger for greatness. Her upbringing was strict. Her mother, Johanna, was a cold and calculating social climber, obsessed with status, not a warm, nurturing figure. Sophie's father, a Prussian officer, was more distant than disciplinary. From a young age, Sophie learned to walk the fine line between obedience and cunning. She read voraciously, spoke multiple languages, and learned how to observe a room before speaking. In it, skills that would soon become survival tools in one of Europe's most brutal courts. When the Russian Empress Elizabeth Petrovna began searching for a wife for her heir, Grand Duke Peter, she looked beyond Russia's borders. Peter himself was of German descent and Empress Elizabeth believed a foreign bride pliable and grateful would be easier to control. Sophie fit the bill perfectly: noble blood, a Lutheran faith she would be forced to abandon, and a reputation for both grace and humility. At just 14 years old, Sophie was summoned to Russia. She arrived in the freezing capital of St. Petersburg in 1744, wearing thin German fabrics and a diplomatic smile. Her mother pushed her forward like a chess piece. Sophie, however, had her own game in mind. To become acceptable in Russian society, she converted to Orthodoxy, taking the name Yekaterina Alexeyevna Catherine. The ceremony was public, symbolic, and life-altering. She wasn't just changing religions, she was burning the bridge behind her, stepping into a foreign empire with no way back. No one watching that quiet teenage girl in a fur-trimmed coat could have predicted what would come next: betrayal, revolution, enlightenment, and empire. From the moment Sophie stepped foot in the Russian court, she stopped being a pawn and began planning how to become a queen. Catherine's marriage to Grand Duke Peter was meant to secure her place in Russian royalty, but from the very beginning, it felt more like a cage than a crown. Peter, heir to the Russian throne, was not the dashing prince of fairy tales. Awkward, immature, and obsessed with toy soldiers, he was far more interested in playing war games in his chambers than governing an empire or showing affection to his new wife. Some accounts even suggest he refused to consummate the marriage for years. He idolized Frederick the Great of Prussia and resented the Russian court that had adopted him. In contrast, Catherine embraced Russia with fierce determination. She learned the language, studied its history, and memorized Orthodox rituals. She wanted to belong. Peter wanted to escape. This mismatch wasn't just emotional, it was political. The Russian court was a viper's nest of gossip, paranoia, and brutal power games. Empress Elizabeth still ruled with absolute authority, but her health was in decline. Everyone knew a transition was coming, and everyone had an agenda. Catherine was watched constantly. Her letters were read, her friendships monitored, and her every move scrutinized. She learned to play the court's games quietly, cultivating allies in the shadows. She charmed military officers, made friends with scholars, and developed a reputation for dignity and restraint. A stark contrast to her husband's childish tantrums and open contempt for Russian traditions. Behind closed doors, Catherine began reading Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire and Montesquieu. While others saw her as a young consort, she was building a vision, not just for herself, but for Russia, a nation of strength, education, and reason. But there was one problem. The longer Peter lived, the longer Catherine remained in limbo, a powerless wife to a man unfit to rule. So she waited, observed, and planned. She knew the Russian throne wouldn't be inherited, it would have to be taken. In 1762, after nearly 2 decades of waiting, watching, and quietly maneuvering, Catherine saw her moment and seized it with breathtaking precision. Empress Elizabeth had died, and Peter, now Peter III, was finally Tsar. But his reign began unraveling almost immediately. In just a few short months, Peter alienated the church, offended the nobility, insulted the army, and lavished praise on Prussia, Russia's longtime enemy. He reversed key policies, humiliated the clergy, and talked openly about divorcing Catherine to marry his mistress. The army, filled with generals loyal to Catherine, grumbled in the corridors, Catherine, watching all of this unfold, made her move. In July of that same year, while Peter was away at his summer palace, Catherine launched a bloodless coup d'etat. Supported by key military officers, including her lover Grigory Orlov and his influential brothers, she rode through St. Petersburg in full regalia, was proclaimed Empress Catherine II, and won the allegiance of the powerful Imperial Guard. Peter caught off guard, and without allies surrendered, within days he was taken into custody and shortly after was found dead under mysterious circumstances. Officially, the cause was reported as hemorrhoidal colic. Unofficially, it was murder. Catherine was now empress not by birth, not by marriage, but by will, wit, and audacity. A foreign-born woman with no legitimate claim had taken the Russian throne without a single battle, but her real challenge was just beginning. She had to transform that bold grab for power into a lasting legacy. She needed to rule not as a schemer, but as a visionary. And so began her transformation from a careful conspirator to a reforming empress, one who would redraw borders, embrace the Enlightenment, and redefine what it meant to be a woman in power. Once Catherine had the crown, she could have rested on her power, but she had something bigger in mind. She wanted to transform Russia, not just militarily or politically, but intellectually. While Peter had worshipped Frederick the Great and his toy soldiers, Catherine idolized Voltaire, Diderot, and the bold thinkers of the Enlightenment. She believed in reason and progress and education. Catherine didn't just read Enlightenment philosophy. She lived it. She corresponded directly with Voltaire for over 15 years and invited Diderot to her court, even purchasing his entire library to support him financially. Her early reign was filled with efforts to codify Russian law. She formed the Legislative Commission in 1767, an ambitious project intended to rewrite the entire legal code. Catherine's own nakaz, or instruction, was a political manifesto that spoke of equality before the law and the dangers of torture. For an empress in 18th century Russia, it was radical. But Enlightenment ideals had to survive the realities of Russia, a vast, feudal, deeply conservative land. Catherine knew this. While she advocated reform, she moved carefully. She abolished some forms of torture and expanded access to secular education, but she also reaffirmed the nobility's control over their serfs to keep them loyal. This was Catherine's balancing act, a philosopher queen in public, a pragmatic empress in private. Catherine wasn't content with reforming Russia from within. She wanted to expand it outward. Where Peter the Great had opened a window to the west, Catherine aimed to knock down the walls. Under her leadership, Russia's borders stretched wider than ever before. One of her most significant campaigns was against the Ottoman Empire. Under generals like Alexander Suvorov and Grigory Potemkin, Russia captured key regions including Crimea and the northern coast of the Black Sea, gaining access to warm water ports that Russian czars had coveted for generations. She also turned her gaze westward, participating in the partitions of Poland with Austria and Prussia. By 1795, Poland was erased from the map, and Russia had claimed vast new lands. To Catherine, expansion wasn't ambition, it was destiny. For all her brilliance, Catherine the Great was just as famous for what went on behind palace doors. Her private life became one of the most talked about aspects of her reign. She had lovers, not just one or two, but a carefully curated parade of them, often handsome younger and politically influential. Among the most important was Grigory Potemkin, a man as brilliant as he was bold. Their relationship blurred the lines between romance and partnership. Some historians believe they may have even married in secret. Potemkin wasn't just a lover. In many ways, he was her co-ruler. Still, Europe couldn't look past the scandal. Satirical pamphlets painted her as lustful and insatiable. After her death, the rumors only worsened, including the completely false and grotesque tale involving a horse spread by her enemies to smear her legacy. But why the obsession? Simple Catherine was a woman who wielded power unapologetically in a world where female rulers were expected to be either saintly virgins or tragic figures. She lived, loved, and ruled on her own terms, and that made her dangerous. In reality, her liaisons were often strategic. She surrounded herself with men who were loyal, capable, and politically useful. For all her control, Catherine's reign was not without peril. In 1773, that peril came in the form of a bearded Cossack named Yemelyan Pugachev. He claimed to be none other than Peter III. Catherine's dead husband returned to reclaim the throne from the German usurper. To Russia's oppressed lower classes, the claim offered hope. Pugachev promised an end to serfdom, lower taxes, and land for the common people. His words lit a fire across the Volga River region, sparking the largest peasant uprising in Russian history. Catherine was shaken. This was a revolt from within her own people. She acted decisively, dispatching professional military forces to crush the rebellion ruthlessly. Pugachev was captured, displayed in an iron cage, and eventually beheaded in Moscow. The Empress, who once quoted Voltaire, now prioritized stability over philosophy. Her dreams of liberating the serfs quietly faded. By the time Catherine the Great died in 1796, she had ruled for over 3 decades, longer than any female ruler in Russian history. Under her reign, Russia's territory expanded by over 200,000 square miles. She helped found the Hermitage Museum, amassed one of Europe's greatest art collections, and championed education and science, even publicly receiving a smallpox inoculation to promote it. Yet, her reign was one of contradictions. While she admired Enlightenment ideals, she never freed the serfs. In fact, she extended serfdom deeper into Russia's territories. Catherine ruled not by divine right, but by force of will and political brilliance. She was called many things: a usurper, a tyrant, a reformer, a seductress. But above all, she was effective. She was a woman who had endured rejection, betrayal, and rebellion, yet never stopped learning or working. Her greatest emotional partnership with Grigory Potemkin faded into deep friendship, and his death in 1791 left a wound that never truly healed. History remembers her by the title she never gave herself, the Great. It wasn't because she was flawless or kind, but because she took power and wielded it on her own terms, in a time and place where women weren't supposed to have any. She didn't just wear the crown, she rewrote what it meant to deserve one,